All right, Joey, let's dive into the class of 2023 because I think we can put a bow on it, right? Maybe there's some Isaiah Gay late ad here, but I think they've filled their guys and filled their class. Mac Rusetich, of course, the late addition here. So let's start big picture, Joey. The Illinois class of 2023 ranks number 43 in the country in the composite team rankings, number 8 in the Big Ten, number 43, and we could break this down average star rating. It's not as high as a lot of the Big Ten teams, but 43 would be their highest rated recruiting class in more than a decade. So if we had to put a letter grade on this, which is always fantastic content, right?
God,
how would you grade the Illini class of 2023?
B, because I still think you can't overlook the misses on the defensive line. You had 2 chances at Rod Pierce. You had 2 chances at Jamel Howard. And you had Jamarion Harkless for a moment. You can't overlook those misses. That's not to take anything away from Alex Bray, Jeremiah Warren, or who's
Mason
Morgan, who I like. It's not taking anything away from those guys, but you can't overlook the fact that you were really in the fight for 3 other 2 in-staters and Jamarion Harkless. And then quarterback, right? Quarterback, Cal Swanson's got very intriguing tools, a lot of things that you think they can work with, but you got to work with them. If you get one of those defensive linemen, does it move up to a B+? Maybe. I feel comfortable saying B.
Yeah. I think I'm on the B+ line.
Yeah.
So I'll go B+ just to be a little different from you. Because you got Malik Elsie, you got Caden Fagan. You would have told me that before the class. I'm like,
that's right.
Pretty dang good. And I am a huge fan of Sabor Kareem. I felt really hot takey when this last spring at this time, because Jair Hill is the in-state kid from Kankakee. Weren't able to land him. Michigan gets him, right? And you lost some of your top targets to Michigan. So it's like, well, that's going to happen when they get back-to-back college football playoffs and Big Ten championships. But I feel really good about landing those 2 guys, landing 9 more in-state prospects, landing a strong edge rusher class. I broke this all down in a story I have up today, my 10 final thoughts. Your offensive line recruits way more Power 5 offers among that group. Your wide receiver group was fantastic. It's the best one I've seen Illinois get maybe in the time that I've covered, just in prospects. Defensive line, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Yeah, that's a little bit. But defensive backs, I thought you did really well. You're doing really well in the Midwest. You're doing really well down in Florida, New Jersey, and Andy Boo, what he's doing there. And you look at, how you kind of stack up. I don't know how long this is going to matter, but the programs you care about and that Illinois really is competing with, right? When you talk about where they're going to be in the Big Ten, it's the Big Ten West. And right now you're behind Nebraska and Iowa in the Big Ten West recruiting rankings. Maybe I'm grading on a curve a little bit, but the fact that you're above Minnesota, Northwestern, Wisconsin, Purdue, I think that's a very encouraging sign for Illinois. The fact that you're winning Power 5 recruiting battles, 4-star recruiting battles, is very encouraging for Illinois. So I think this is the best recruiting class Illinois has landed in a while. Like at 2017, I felt really good about that one. Last year, felt like that was a step forward. This was a better, even bigger step forward, I thought, than the last year was. So I just think this was a really, really good recruiting class for Illinois. So let's dive into best positional hauls, Joey. What's the most encouraging one?
Wide receiver. Malik Elsie looks the part. He's got everything you want. Colin Dixon's a guy who, you and I think pretty highly of in terms of what he can bring. Those 2 have a lot of potential moving down the road. You're starting to see some stack. It doesn't have the numbers, right? It's not like the offensive line. You got 3 guys there, edge rusher. But I really like what they were able to add at wide receiver.
Yeah, no, I think that's the best group they gotten, maybe outside of specialists, right?
Yeah.
Declan Dooley and David Alano, 2 of the best in the state. Yeah, I think wide receiver has got to be the most encouraging. This is a position Illinois has been terrible recruiting before George McDonald arrived. And the fact that you won Malik Elsie, maybe as important of a target in this class as anybody. The fact that you won that. Colin Dixon, one of the most productive wide receivers in Ohio They play good football in Ohio. Kanari Wilcher, one of the most productive wide receivers in Florida. They play good football in Florida. I think all those guys have a chance to make an early impact. I think all those guys have a chance to be really, really good, and they all add something very different. Like Malik Elsie can make plays after the catch, but is big, physical, strong, and he's just got a great demeanor and attitude about him. Colin Dixon, a little bit versatile in everything that he can do, but certainly can stretch a defense. And then Kanari Wilcher is just a burner, man. And they need burners. You talk about, getting somebody who can make plays after the catch, but also just take the top off of defense. Kanari Wilcher potentially can do that. So that is number one. I think the DB class was really strong, headlined by Sabor Kareem. They flipped Zachary Toby from North Carolina. He's a no doubt Power 5 guy. Jaheim Clark's one of my favorite guys in this class. I think he's a little underrated. He's long. He's a little thin, Joey, but he's aggressive. And Illinois has done well with guys like that. Then Mac Rusetich is intriguing, certainly, as a late get, somebody that kept under the radar. I think that's a well-balanced class. The other one I would say is
my favorite guy, one of my favorite guys in the class, Caleb Patterson, junior college edition, but I really, really like him.
No, yeah, he can make an immediate impact. Length, man. I broke this down. Like a lot of these guys, all of them are over 6 foot. 4 of them, all the guys who could play corner potentially, are over 6'1". So that has been a definite focus for them, especially after adding Tyson Rooks and Matthew Bailey last year. Offensive line was good too. I thought the Brandon Henderson flip was massive. He has the fewest amount of Power 5 offers of those guys, but I just think he's got the highest ceiling. I think he could be really, really good down the road. TJ McMillan, to me, is such a high floor guy, potential team captain. Then Zach Amlin reminds me of Hunter Whitenack. Maybe not as burly, but just the way he plays is just – he's massive, long, and just physical as hell.
This isn't – obviously, they play different positions. You get some Keith Randolph vibes with Brandon Henderson. Newish to football, really high ceiling, comes in pretty raw. Keith had everybody and their brother coming after him, especially late in the process. You see why. But maybe it's the Metro East and the big guy in the trenches. But I think there's some similarity. That's not to say Brandon Henderson is going to turn into what Keith Randolph is at his position, but just the rawness there. I think there might be some parallels.
Yeah, no, and to get somebody at East St. Louis along with JoJo Hayden was pretty big. Remaining concerns. You mentioned defensive line. I like the evaluations they actually made in this class. Mason Moraga and Alex Bray, especially, I think are just tenacious. Big guys, maybe not the biggest, but like they're big Power 5 defensive linemen. Jeremiah Warren, certainly a solid nose guard prospect that I know Alan True really likes as an evaluation. But none of those guys have Power 5 offers. So you're relying on evaluation and development. And I think Terrence Jameson is a really good developer of talent. Like what he's done with that group, not only Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph, but I think T-Rod Edwards was really good. Calvin Avery had his best year last year. So I think he's doing a really, really good job of technique and developing those guys to be the best they can be. And they could probably take another leap this year. But to report the next wave of your post Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph defensive line, you don't have a Johnny Newton or Keith Randolph recruiting win. Right? Like those guys, their ceilings were extremely high. Allen thinks Mason Moraga and Alex Bray, Jeremiah Warren, all have a high floor, which is important. But do you have the game records of Johnny Newton, Keith Randolph? Maybe they will be in 4 years. It's just they didn't have the recruiting wins that sometimes it takes to have dominant defensive lines.
Yeah. I think my hang up, you like those evaluations, and a lot of that comes into you trust the staff's evaluation. Like if you're a fan and you want to look at this, how much do you trust the staff's evaluation? But my concern would be you need guys next year. Like it was a gift to get Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph back for this coming season. You need guys after that. Are these the guys? It's foolish to try to say yes or no right now, right?
Yeah, it's compounded by the fact that the 2 previous recruiting classes, you got Sed McConnell, and that's it.
Which, let's be fair, it's probably not fair to evaluate, like to the guys to evaluate this class based on the other 2, but it's part of the picture, and you have to look at it like that. That's
the concern, right? Is you had this great defensive line cell this year, a couple guys in state that fit it. Now you lost them to Michigan and Wisconsin. So those are tough, but you want to start winning those. And you weren't able to win those in this class. And to lose a guy like Jamarian Harkless, who I wrote at the time, I thought he was as big of a get. Like if they had signed Jamarian Harkless, now listen, I don't know what happened behind the scenes. He ends up at Purdue with Ryan Walters, gets dropped by Ole Miss. So I don't know, but like talent wise, I thought he was exactly what they needed as a future nose tackle. They're certainly going to keep going to the portal. They did with Denzel Daxon again this year. I think T-Raw is going to be good, but yeah, it's compounded by it's 3 years in a row where you really don't have a big Power 5 recruiting win on the defensive line. And at some point, Johnny Newton and Keith Randolph are going to the pros, and you have to replace those guys. So that's the concern.
Can we talk about defensive? Because like you and I have talked a lot on road trips about defensive line recruiting, but I don't know that we've talked a lot on the podcast. So something to think about here. And I want to preface this with, we're not saying, hey, don't sweat it. You know, I feel like there have been misses like that. You want to close on the misses you've had. Like we need to put that out there in plain terms. Like for Illinois to keep building depth there, you've got to start closing on guys like Rod Pierce, like Jamel Howard. Defense, but that being said, Jeremy, defensive line recruiting is really hard because there are not enough Power 5 defensive linemen for Power 5 teams. And again, I don't want to excuse the fact that you've missed guys because like that happened, and you're going to some of those guys are going to come back to bite you that you've missed. Like that's just a fact of reality.
And let's be honest, like I thought Lovie Smith was pretty good at it.
Yeah.
You know, Bobby Roundtree was a heck of a get. Obviously Keith and Johnny were big gets. Owen Carney was a really big recruiting win. So I think he was pretty good at it. Maybe not towards the end, but this staff obviously didn't get off on the right foot last year, losing Brian Allen and Terrell Jones, those guys flipping. But I think they at least addressed depth, right? They at least addressed depth. And I think you have guys who are going to contribute. Do you have guys who can be stars? That's my question. And maybe in 3 or 4 years, Mason Moragan is wrecking havoc on the Big Ten because he is the type of guy Iowa has signed and has ended up being awesome for them.
So let's go down the list of the misses over the last 2 years. And I was jotting this down while you were talking. I'm just looking at guys who visited and not just the sheer offers thrown out. Visits are, officially visiting is kind of the bar here. Terrell Jones, he ends up at Virginia. I don't know that he wanted to sign in the early period. I think that's
moved on, right?
Yeah. So Brian Allen committed, had ties to Iowa. That ended up being able to go through. He ends up at Iowa. So just 2 Power 5 flips. Jamel Howard, he had 2 cracks at him. That's a tough one. He ends up at Wisconsin both times. Rod Pierce ends up at Wisconsin. You missed the first time. You probably regret not closing that down earlier. If you could have, goes to Wisconsin, decommits, ends up at Michigan. Jamarian Harkless, you discussed, commits, decommits. He ends up at Auburn, correct? And there was a coaching change. He gets dropped by Auburn, ends up at Purdue.
Sorry, I said Ole Miss. Yeah,
that's right. Salah Brown, tough one. He felt like Louisville was going to be his home through and through. You put in a hell of a fight for him. You didn't get him. Now, like this isn't losing someone. And again, I don't want it to sound like I'm just dismissing, like, well, don't sweat it because they're all going to Power 5 guys, because you would love to have Salah Brown going into his second year.
At some point, you want to win those.
Yes, you want to win those, but you're losing. You see the demand. Like you're losing to Michigan, you're losing to Wisconsin, you're losing to Iowa.
Look who offered Jamel Howard at the end. LSU,
it's the whole world,
right? LSU, like, Miami, yeah.
The point I want to make, and I just hope it doesn't get lost, is there's not enough. There are not enough defensive linemen. There's just not.
Like big men in basketball, right?
Yes, and because there's not enough, SEC programs, some of those powers, college football's powers, the power broker, the team that get what they want, can go in there and clean up and get everything else. And then you do have to rely on your evaluations and your ability to find a Mason Moragan, whose film is really good, and he plays his butt off. And you've got to trust that you're going to take that evaluation and develop it. But yeah, man, like in 2 years, you probably are going to wish you had, those stars, like again, maybe those guys turn into that, but you need like immediately. I think there's a very big sense of urgency there. I just want to point out it's hard, dude. That's a really hard position.
I think you made your point. Quarterback. Luke Altmaier helps us a lot, right? John Paddock helps us a lot. This is not on the staff so far. Like, they've had 2 new offense coordinators. Now maybe it's on Brett Bielema to hire the right offense coordinator in the first place, but he corrected that mistake. Cal Swanson's toolsy, really toolsy. I wrote in my thing, he's got some Manzellian funness to him. And when things go off script, he is fast. He is athletic. He's got this kind of innate sense of where to go. But as a passer, he's going to have a lot of development ahead. I was told when he committed, ask me in 3 years. Like, let's see in 3 years. And I think that's right. And I think they're going to give him that time. And you can when you have Luke Altmaier and Donovan Leary and for a year, John Paddock, right? Like Kirkle Michaud. They're probably going to go back into the portal at some point. If Altmaier works out, you won't have to, and you can develop some of these guys. But, quarterback remains a question prep-wise because you haven't had a lot to sell there. Now, they hope to change that in 2024 and win a Power 5 battle. It's been a while since Illinois has won a Power 5 battle for a quarterback. So time will tell on Cal Swanson. They like the tools. I know Barry Lunny loves the escapability. When things break down, you got a guy who can make a play. It's just the footwork, the mechanics, the decision-making are going to have to improve. And we have to mention he didn't have a lot of talent around him. So some of the decision-making, I just think he felt like he had to go make some plays. And he certainly is capable of that. But quarterback, finding more long-term options, that's going to be a priority moving forward.
I wanted to make a joke and say one more about the defensive line here that I have anything. All those things are true. And I think this year's a better test of quarterback recruiting with a full cycle for Barry Lunny Jr. and his time at Illinois, because you did it similar to line. Like, there's not enough. Like, you've got, and it moves fast. Quarterbacks in the portal move fast. Quarterbacks in high school move fast. So you've got to be in there early. And I think Cal Swanson's got a ton of tools, but like most freshmen quarterbacks who aren't 5 stars, who aren't ready-made 3-year max college players, it's going to take some time to get him ready. And that's why you go and get a Luke Altmaier. That's why you add a quarterback every class for that reason. But yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that he does that's intriguing. That's good. I mean, he's a hell of an athlete. He's a really, really good athlete. We'll see what happens from there, but that's kind of probably moving forward. Check back in 2 or 3 years. If you're in Illinois, if you're in Iowa, Purdue, like if you're not one of those big players, that's probably the line of thinking for a lot of quarterbacks committing at this level of college football.
All right, Joey, let's wrap this up. The offseason isn't over, right? Like, the class of 2023, mostly over. They will start to focus more on 2024 and 2025 moving forward, but there's still a transfer portal to play out, another transfer window after the spring. So obviously we got to answer the last assistant on this staff, but give me your biggest remaining offseason question for Illinois football, whether that's a spring storyline or a transfer storyline.
It's probably the same. Do you think you've got enough at running back? That's probably it for me. Do you get to spring? Does Josh McCray look like freshman Josh McCray? Does Reggie Love take that leap? Is Aiden Lawfrey healthy? I think a wild card still is Jordan Anderson. I think you and I both agree, Caden Fagan. Good-looking athlete. Looks like a kid who's he's ready. Like, physically, looks ready. There's a big jump from Arthur Lovington Atwood Hammond to the Big Ten. Do you feel like right now you've got enough to maintain and to take a step forward where you want to go offensively and collectively as a team? If not, can you find that answer after the second wave of the portal opens?
Yeah, I do think it's a little bit running back. Not that I question, can they get production out of this group? I think Reggie Love can be good. I think Josh McCray, we've seen it. He can be good at this level. But Jordan Anderson, I think, is a really intriguing guy. I'm really interested to see how they use him. I do think he's going to be part of their rotation at some point. I think Aiden Lawfrey is really what they need. It's just he's been so injury prone over the last 3 years of his life with some of these soft tissue injuries, but he's strong for his size, 5'10", 205, but he's just a blazer, right? You need some explosiveness in that room. Maybe Reggie can find another gear as he gets more healthy here, but Chase could be, a guy who got a bunch of chunk plays. And I think you need another running back who can do that. You got a bunch of big backs here, and I think that's nice to have. But at some point, I do think you're going to need a guy who can break some big runs. Do you find that in the portal? Do you feel like you need it? Is Lawfrey healthy? Is Reggie Love showing another gear? But for the future, 2024, I do think with all the big backs they've gotten, and understandably why they've gotten them, I do think you need somebody who can be more explosive in that running back room. But the fact that we're talking about a group that I feel is solid is like a remaining question. I mean, we talk about the fourth or fifth guy in the offensive line. I've already brought that up. I mean, I am interested to see who emerges from that tight end room. Tanner Arkin certainly is going to be in there with Tip Ryman, but Henry Boyer is a massive body. But that's a group that I think needs to improve. I don't think the tight end play was great outside of Tip Ryman last year. Michael Marquez was solid. Luke Ford, I don't think ever turned into the player a lot of people thought he could be. So I do think that's a room that can take a step forward as well. But yeah, when we're talking about the portal, the likely position we're focused on is running back because you can entice a star there. I think says something. But the way they've added to that room yet, I would say they're more likely to run with what they got, but it'll be intriguing to watch out.
Yeah, I think then you get into some of the finer details, I guess, and maybe it's too. Defensive back, how does that shake out? You think Taz Nicholson's going to be at one corner? I would probably guess Caleb Patterson at the other. Tyler Strain, somebody to watch. Like, just how does all that look back there? I think you and I have mentally pictured in Matthew Bailey starting somewhere in the defensive backfield. Could be a number of positions. So I think that's interesting. But I think, Jeremy, as we prepare to cover spring here in a month and a half or so, give or take, probably the fewest, I don't want to say questions because every year there's questions, whether it be, like you said, the running back, the fourth or fifth line, defense, but like the fewest pressing questions. Like where it's like, oh God, like that could be a total, I don't think there's a spot where I say that could be a total wreck. Like I think you've elevated the talent and the coaching staff and some of these, and the players get some of the benefits of the doubts there. Like there's been years where quarterback was like, oh my God, who could possibly do this? Who, I ask.
I mean, think about this offseason so far. Like when we started doing our transfer portal like needs, quarterback was number one. They got two guys right there, probably going to be top two, if not two of your top three. We talked about offensive line. They tried that with Avery Jones, but getting all the guys they got back was just as big. I think offensive line, that still remains a question. I think that's probably the priority transfer in the spring is offensive line. Defensive line was, then you got the two guys back. You got the law firm back, and it isn't. Linebacker was potentially one. Tariq Barnes and CJ Hart came back. Cornerback, you got Caleb Patterson. Safety, you got Nicario Harper. Tight end, you got Tanner Arkin. So it's more about like outside of offensive line, which may be thrown in here. It's about, can we upgrade? Can we upgrade offensive? Can we upgrade at wide receiver? Can we upgrade at running back? I don't think you need depth anywhere else. I think it's more about, can you upgrade your starting lineup right now in the portal?
Well, do those transfers, I mean, let's be honest, the transfer's been spotty. Like the production from transfers in the last 2 years has been spotty. So can Tanner Arkin, can Nicario Harper, Luke Altmaier, can they come in and be what Illinois probably both hopes and needs them to be? Outside of Tommy DeVito, and I guess you could say I think Art Sikowski did exactly what Art Sikowski was supposed to do. Mm-hmm. I've got some questions just about some of the productivity of what they brought in via the portal.
Yeah. I don't think we have anything else to add about Illinois football's offseason.